Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I welcome you to the 23rd lecture on the course Management, Organizational Policies and Practices. Let's have a quick recap of lecture 22 and then we move to the contents of the 23rd lecture. We had a discussion during the 22nd lecture on what is power, what are the different power tactics, on the power political behavior that the employees have and the influences. So we started off with the concept of power, what is power and how we can distinguish between power and leadership. So this difference between the power and leadership and management is really important for you people to understand. Then we had a discussion on what are the different bases of power. We discussed that concept of the dependency, the key to power, how being dependent on the other person is important, or on the organizational resource, on a particular knowledge source, or on a particular rewards, etc. For anything, if you are dependent on the other person, only then that person would be powerful. But if even if that person has authority, but that is you don't have the dependency on that individual, then that individual won't be powerful to you, right? So we discussed in relation to this that there are a number of power sources that are such as the legitimate power sources. We had a discussion on the coercive power sources, on the reward power sources, the formal power sources, and we also discussed the two personal power sources, one of which was the expert power source and the other one was the referent power source. And we had a discussion that how the formal power sources, they are not as effective as are the personal power sources, because personal power sources, they are based on the expertise of the individual, right? And the individual is able to exercise his power on the other individual on the basis of the expertise and the knowledge that he has. Maybe that is related to a particular subject, he is really subject specialist, right? Or it is on the basis of his specialized knowledge in a particular field. For example, an engineer who has a very sound knowledge of a particular engineering item, then he has that expert knowledge, but he does not have the formal power, he does not have the legitimate authority, but still that individual might be very powerful in the organization, right? And he might draw more satisfaction and more productivity and more commitment from the employees compared to the manager who has the legitimate power, because the other person who has the legitimate power, the manager, he gets work done through the subordinates only because he has the formal authority to do that. But other than that, there is no reason. But for these the personal power sources, they are really more they are really more influencing in terms of the positive effects on the attitudes of the people as well, right? And similarly for the referent power sources, wherein you're basically trying to kind of idealizing somebody, you're really liking some certain traits in their personality characteristics, and that is why you're doing something upon their desire or upon their wish, right? So these are all the different power sources that we went through in detail, and then we considered the concept of the dependency, which is the key to power. And we saw that there are three basically items, or there are three determinants of dependency. One is the importance of that particular resource for which you are dependent on. Then is the scarcity, and then is the non-substitutability. So if you are dependent on someone for some certain resource, but that resource is really important for you, but that resource is not scarce, then the power of the resource holder will be lower, right? And because you can always get to someone else for getting that resource. And if the other person from to whom you are dependent for that resource. If that resource is important to you, that is scarce as well, but that is substitutable, then again the power of that resource holder would be less. It won't be that powerful, because you can substitute that resource for another resource, right? And so for power to establish, the dependency postulate says that the B must depend on A for that resource, and that resource should be valuable for B as well, and that resource should have the characteristics of being important, of being scarce, and of being non-substitutable. This dependency postulate, it is just similar to the internal resources and the resource strategic capability postulate that we had discussed when we discussed the internal environment of an organization. Then we also discussed that in order for a firm to sustain a competitive advantage, how it needs to have the sustainable the resources that are rare, those resources that are rare, and with these characteristics of these power resources, they're also similar to the characteristics that we discussed there. Then we saw that what are the different power tactics that the managers they can use, and there was a combination of around 9 different power tactics that the managers they can use, starting off from the softer power tactics such as the consultation, such as the rewards and inspirational appeals, to the harder power tactics such as the pressure and legitimacy, etc., which are the more harder power tactics, right? And we discussed that how a combination of these power tactics that can be helpful, especially a combination of the softer power tactics. So if a manager uses, if the research shows that if a manager uses a softer power tactic, that is more effective than if a manager uses a harder power tactic. And when it comes to combination, if a manager uses a softer power tactic along with rational persuasion, that would be more effective than if the manager uses too hard power tactics, right? So the managers should always start with using the softer power tactic, and then if those softer power tactics don't work, then they should move to the harder power tactics. And if they have to use a combination, they should try to use the combination of a harder power tactic with a softer power tactic, right? Compared to using the both the harder power tactics, right? And then we had a discussion on the different factors that influence the choice and effectiveness of power tactics. Then we discussed the political behavior, that what is political behavior, what are the why the organizations behave politically, or why there are always politics found in the organization, which we also term as politicking. Then we discussed the different determinants of political behavior, and we saw that how there are a number of individual factors as well as there are a number of organizational factors that determine whether you will behave politically in the organization or you will not behave politically in the organization. So the personal factors, they ranged from the personality of the individual, such as the high Mach personality or low Mach personality, whether the individual is a self-monitor or not, what is the locus of control of the individual, is it internal or is it external, what are the level of the organizational investments that the individual has in the organization, what are the opportunities in the external markets that the individual has, so they were some of the key individual factors that determine the political behavior of the individual. And then we discussed the organizational factors, that how the level of the trust in the organization between the manager and the subordinate, and the role ambiguity, the level of formalization, that also determines the political behavior of the organization. So if the organization is very, very formal, then the chances are that the political behavior may not be much. When the rules and policies, they are really formalized, and when the rules and policies are not that formalized, there is low level of formality, then there are chances for the individuals to manipulate the situations and to take advantage of the weak situations. And when the organizational culture is not that strong, it is weak, then also the individuals tend to engage more in the political activity and the political behavior. And we also discussed that the political behavior is of two types. One is the legitimate political behavior, and the other one is the illegitimate political behavior, which is the extreme kinds of political behaviors, such as you are entering into the strikes, or you're wearing unorthodox uniform, etc. And we discussed that the political behavior which is legitimate is the normal behavior and the normal political activity that keeps going in the organizations, and that is part of the day-to-day routine work in the organization, such as you are going to your supervisor and complaining him about someone else or certain things, about certain procedure, etc., and trying to mold the situation more in your favor, right? And so they are the basically legitimate political behaviors. Then we discussed that how the political behavior influences the employees and their employee outcomes, right? And we discussed that the political behavior for those individuals who are really non-political, for them the political behavior in the organization and the organizational politics, that might have a little negative effect, right? Because they are the people who don't want to enter into the organizational politics, and then they see this politics, that it is going against them, or it is working against them, or it is creating unfavorable situations and unfavorable circumstances for them in the organization, and they start feeling themselves really aloof from what is happening in the organization, because the people who are really politically skilled, they are basically very astute people, and they are very strong in their social networking as well, right? So they have greater tendency to build coalitions, they have greater tendency to build strong social relationships and social networks with the significant others in the organization, through whom they can gain certain organizational benefits, and through whom they can mold the situations more in their favor. So these people who don't participate in that kind of organizational political activities, they start feeling that they are left out, and it has really negative impact on their employee satisfaction and on their organizational commitment, and they feel more stressed and they feel more anxious, and these people also show increased turnover rates and lower performance. We also had a discussion on how these political behaviors, the relationship between the political behavior and the different employee outcomes, that is moderated by the perceptions and by the understanding of the individuals. So the individuals who have very good understanding of how things are working, what is the mechanism under which who are the significant others who are making the decisions, of which resources are in whose hands, how the decisions are made, right? So all these do's and don'ts, and all these the mechanism through which the decision making takes place in the organization, and what are the formal and informal structures, etc. So about all this, the people who are strong in this kind of understanding, they are basically for them the relationship between political behavior and the employee outcomes is not negative, but it is negative for the individuals who have very low understanding of these political activities and why and how they are carrying on in the organization. Then we had a discussion on the organizational policies and the resource allocations, and with this respect we discussed that very briefly we had a discussion on why the organizational objectives they are formed, and how we need to have a compatibility between the organizational objectives, between the organizational objectives at all levels, at the different department levels. Their objectives, they need to be aligned with each other to achieve the overall organizational outcomes, and how these objectives also need to aligned vertically with the overall organizational strategy. The objectives of the different departments, they should be aligned with that overall strategy of the organization, so that when all the departments in the organization, they have a certain direction in which they are moving, and secondly that if they have the objectives that are aligned with the organizational strategy, only then the organizational strategy that can be realized, right? So we discussed that why these objectives they are made, why they should be clear, what are the different contents of good objectives that are developed in the organization. And we had a discussion on why the organizations, they form different policies, how these policies, they can be different organization wide, and they can be different, they will be different across the organizations. Within the same industry, they will be different within the organization. So different departments, they can even have different policies, right? And within the same organization, the policy can be different at the level of the different departments. For example, in the sales department, maybe you don't need to undergo that much extensive trainings, but in the operations department, where there are fast changes in the processes that the organization is using, or in the technology that there has been used for make certain productions, therein the employees, they might need to undergo frequent trainings, and where that training might be mandatory for the employees in that department. While there may be no such trainings in the sales department, or the trainings may not be mandatory, or there might be very few trainings depending upon the nature and the context of the job, right? So there are different departments, they can have their different policies, right? And we discussed that these policies, they are a way of standardizing the way the work is set done in the organization, and they are a way of setting the limits for the organization, setting guidelines for the organization and on how to behave in certain ways. So they also help in quick decision making by the managers, right? So then we had a discussion on the different the trade-offs between the different policies in the organization. Why do the managers, they have to make those trade-offs, right? Because they have the limited resources, and also because they have to get this strategy accomplished and implemented by selecting the policies and by selecting those ways in which it can optimize its returns, right? And then there can be a problem of there can be a conflicts can arise between the managers when it has to distribute, when it comes to that reallocation and the distribution of the resources, right? And how those trade-off decisions and how those conflicts, they need to be resolved. We'll be discussing more about it in our next lectures. So this was it that we discussed for our lecture on the power and politics, and we discussed a few important points about the policies that are formed and how the trade-off decisions, they need to be made, in what areas the policies are formed, and what can be the different challenges vis-a-vis the trade-off decisions that the organizations have to make. So let's have our discussion today on ethics, justice and fair treatment. I understand that some of the points that we are discussing here, I might have discussed with you in one of my previous lectures, but the points that we are discussing here, they are in different contexts than what we discussed in our previous lecture. So this here we are going to take this topic as the full topic for our today's lecture, and previously at one or two places I might have used some of these as reference points. Okay, so what are the different learning goals for today's lecture? We'll be explaining what is meant by ethical behavior at work. We'll discuss the important factors that shape ethical behavior at work. Then we'll describe at least 4 specific ways in which management can influence ethical behavior at work. We'll employ fair disciplinary practices, and we'll list at least 4 important factors in managing dismissals effectively. Then we'll be also talking a little about the wrongful discharge, and we'll also be talking about the concept of layoffs, of the termination interview, and we'll also talk about the exit interview in the end. Okay, so let's see what is ethics and fair treatment at work. So ethics is, as we all know, it is the principles of conduct governing an individual or group, especially the standards you use to decide what your conduct should be, right? So it is the different standards that are set by the individual or a certain group, right? Or the society. They can also be set by the society, they can be set by a particular group, they can be set by the organization, they can be set by your own self, they can be set by your state, and they can be set at all different levels. So they are the standards on how you should what your conduct should be like, and how you should behave. And what is the moral way of doing things, and what is the moral way of acting, right? So ethical behavior depends on the person's frame of reference to a large extent. So let's have a discussion on this in our next slide. Here we see there are a number of questions. If I pose these questions to you people, it is basically a ethics quiz that was designed and developed by the Wall Street Journal Workplace. There are a number of 16 questions in this quiz on ethics, right? And if I pose these questions to you, some of you would be answering a yes to these questions, and some of you would be answering a no to these questions, right? So, which indicates that all the individuals, they have different ethical standards, right? So we perceive different things differently, right? Some individuals, they perceive an act ethical, and the others may perceive that same act as unethical. So there are a combination of factors that determine our ethical behavior, right? So first let's have a discussion. I quickly pick up a few questions from these for you people and have a discussion on them, and then we move on. So office technology, is it wrong to use company email for personal reasons? Now some of you would be saying yes, it is wrong, we should not use the company email for personal reasons, and some of you would be saying that no, it's not wrong, there is no harm in using the company email for personal reasons, right? So and most of in different organizations, they have different policies, they have different codes of conduct. So the code of conduct is basically stating that what is ethical and what is not ethical, how you should behave and how you should not behave, right? So that is also a code of conduct is explaining to us the different ways of doing different things, the desired ways and the do's and don'ts. Different organizations, they have different codes of conduct. So it also shows that the ethical standards and the judgments of what is ethical and what is not ethical, they differ from people to people, from individuals to individuals, and from organizations to organizations, right? So what is ethical in one organization may not be termed as ethical in another organization. Now if we again come back to this question, we would have seen that there are certain companies who have this restricted policy on use of the company email for personal reasons, right? So even if you use your company email to send some email to your friend or someone else on their personal email address, that email bounces back. You cannot do that. You cannot send that email to someone's personal address, right? And such as the addresses such as the Yahoo, the Gmail, the Google, the one Hotmail, they are blocked by certain organizations, right? And you cannot you can neither receive the emails from the personal email, the other person's personal accounts to your company email, nor you can send that, right? So certain organizations have this policy, and then there are certain organizations who have the policy that you cannot even access those personal emails at your during office hours or in your office premises. Those sites are blocked, right? And some organizations, they have this policy that you can use your personal emails. You can open your personal email websites while sitting in office. You can use your office email to use for personal purposes, right? And so on. So different organizations, they have different policies on all these different issues, and that partly depends upon the context of the organization. So some organizations wherein the information is of very sensitive nature, and therein they may introduce such checks, and the organizations where that informations are not that sensitive, they may not have such checks, and so on. So but the point here is that what is ethical and what is unethical, this is a relatively subjective term, and different individuals, they have different judgments on what is ethical and what is unethical, and the different organizations have different codes of conduct which makes certain things ethical and certain things unethical, right? Then again, if you have the second question here, that is it wrong to use office equipment to help your children or spouse do schoolwork? Is it wrong to play computer games on office equipment during the work day? Is it wrong to use office equipment to do internet shopping? Is it unethical to blame an error you made on a technological glitch? Is it unethical to visit pornographic websites using office equipment? And is it okay to take $100 holiday food basket, right? So these are all the some of the questions that are on the ethical stance, and that might invite contradictory answers from you people, because it actually invited this quiz, when it was conducted, it actually invited contradictory evidence from different people. So around 40% people, they answered in yes, around. Okay, what are the different factors that influence this ethical behavior or ethical decisions, right? One, we see that there are normative judgments, which are the judgments that something is good or bad, right or wrong, better or worse. And one is the moral standards, which are the societal expectations, society's expected standards for behaviors that have serious consequences to its well-being. So behaviors that cannot be established or changed by decisions of authoritative bodies, and the behaviors that override self-interest, right? So we have these moral standards, and we have these standards which are set by the society, that what are the expected behaviors, and these expectations, they have the serious consequences for the well-being, and we have this normative standards. Okay, we see that this ethics is not we may not see very strong, or we may not see a good relationship between the law and ethics, right? So law may not be a good guideline for developing your ethics code, we can say, right? Because law is not the best guide about what is ethical. Why? Because if I give you an example of an organization dismissing a 58-year-old employee with 30 years tenure without notice or cause, may be unethical but definitely legal, right? So if you are dismissing a 58-year-old employee, that is perfectly legal decision, but that may be an unethical decision. You are dismissing an employee who is very close to his retirement, and he has a 30 years of experience or 30 years of tenure, right? And without any notice, you are expelling that employee. So that might be highly immoral and unethical act that might be considered, but that is a perfectly legal act. So this with this we see that behavior that may be legal but unethical. Then there can be certain instances where a behavior may be illegal but ethical. Then a behavior may be both illegal and ethical, and a behavior may be both illegal and unethical. So being legal cannot be a good guide as to if it will be ethical as well or not. Okay, how the fairness perceptions, they are formed. They are formed from a number of different dimensions, on different on the basis of the perceptions of the individuals on various aspects of the organizational justice, such as the distributive justice, which is about the fairness of the outcomes. What are the perceptions of the employees as to the outcomes of the outcomes he is getting from the organization, right? So if we use the equity theory that we discussed earlier as well, if we use that as an umbrella to discuss this distributive justice concept, it will be easier for you to understand that the individuals in organizations, they try to calculate this distributive justice, and they try to build their distributive justice perceptions basing on making their comparisons with the referent others. So that is what the equity theory says, that the individuals, what they do is that they try to make comparisons with the significant others basing on their input-output ratio and basing on the input-output ratio of the referent others. So if their input-output ratio is lower compared to that of the referent other, then they will perceive the injustice, and then they will be doing a number of a series of steps to reduce that perceived injustice. For example, they can either lower their contributions, their input vis-a-vis the output, and so that their input-output ratio is also declined and becomes equal to that of the referent other. Then the other things that they can do is that they can start producing more output, but of that can be of lower quality, and to show that they are to show that they produce better, right, and that they're giving better outcomes. They can just change their referent others and by saying that, okay, this is not a good comparison, and maybe that person is a better comparison. They change their referent others, and so on. There are a number of combinations in which they can change that input output ratio compared to that of the referent other. And then the procedural justice perceptions, they are basically the fairness of the process by which the decision was reached. So it is related to the procedures that have been used in the organization to arrive at certain decisions. Right, so the procedural justice that is important, managers need to understand that it should be basically the justice perceptions of the individuals and or the fairness perceptions of the individual. They start building right at the time of the selection process, right at the time of the recruitment process. What is the process that the organization is using for making its selections, or what are the different recruitment policies that the organization is using, right? So what are the different selection procedures it is using? What are the different tests that the organization is using? Are the tests really a valid measure of the organizational performance, or of the job? Are they really valid measures of the job performance, or those tests are discriminatory, right? They are your selection procedures discriminatory or not? So we had a complete discussion on what can make certain practices discriminatory in your hiring and in your selection procedures, and how those discriminatory practices, they can build in unfairness in the eyes of the prospective applicant. So your applicant right from the time of the submitting an application with the organization, right from that time he starts building his perceptions about the level of the fairness of the organization and its treatment towards the prospective candidate, right? So if the procedures, the fair procedures are being used right from the beginning, right from the recruitment process, and then to the selection, and then through the training in the performance evaluations, and in all those different steps, if the right procedures are used, then even if the outcomes are negative, the employees or the prospective candidates, they do not feel unfair about the organization, and they do not feel miserable. They tend to accept those outcomes more. So if your selection process is really fair, and it is authentic and fair, and it is valid, and it can be proven that it is just cause selection process, then the perceptions of the prospective candidates who have been rejected, they would be different, and it would be easier for them to accept that outcome compared to when they perceive that the procedure which was being used to arrive at those particular outcomes, that was not a fair procedure that was being used, right? Then we have this interactional justice perceptions. It is the manner in which managers conduct their interpersonal dealings with the employees, right? So how you are good in how well you are in your interpersonal relationships with the others, right? Or what are your interpersonal relationships with your subordinates? So it is interactional justice has basically two subcomponents. One is the informational justice, and the other one is the interpersonal justice. So under the interpersonal justice, it comes about the level of trust that the manager shows in its subordinates, and the level of respect that the manager shows towards the subordinates, the recognition the manager gives to the subordinate for doing a certain task, etc., right, and not blaming your subordinate and things like that. So that is the interpersonal relationship that you have with your subordinate. Whereas the informational justice is the amount of and the quantity and the quality of the information that the supervisor exchanges with the subordinate, right? Because the subordinates and all the employees in the organization, they have right, and they have right to access, and they should have access to the organizational information, especially to the information that is related to their work and to their job, right? And some managers, they are in a habit to not to disseminate disseminate the information, all of the organizational information to the members or to the subordinates, and keep that information to themselves, which is wrong, and it can enhance the perceptions of unfairness on the part of the subordinates. So the international justice, it composes of these two subcomponents, one the interpersonal and the other one is the informational justice. So of course, the better you have these types of justices, the more you perceive that you have interactional justice is coming from your manager, the better outcomes it would have for you in terms of your more satisfaction and commitment, and especially the commitment with the supervisor would be more when you perceive that your supervisor is showing interactional justice in his treatment with you. When you report to be perceiving this procedural justice, then the employees tend to be more supportive of the organization, and they tend to be more committed to the organization. So these different dimensions of fairness, they are all related to a number of organizational and individual outcomes. But the degree to which their relative attachment to those outcomes, that is different, and the strength in which they are attached to the different outcomes, that is also different. In one of our upcoming slides, we will be discussing more of these different types of organizational justice with respect to the outcomes that they have for the organization. So here I have as an example a scale for you, which is measuring the fairness perceptions in the interpersonal treatment. So it is about the quality of the relationships that you have, or that the supervisor has with you. Not exactly the quality of the relationship, but how you perceive that your supervisor is treating with you in his interpersonal treatment. So as a few examples, we see that in this organization, employees are praised for good work, supervisors yell at employees, supervisors play favorites, employees are trusted, employees' complaints are dealt with effectively, employees are treated like children, employees are treated with respect, employees' questions and problems are responded to quickly, employees are lied to, employees' suggestions are ignored, supervisors swear at employees, employees' hard work is appreciated, supervisors threaten to fire or lay off employees, employees are treated fairly, co-workers help each other out, co-workers argue with each other, co-workers put each other down, co-workers treat each other with respect. So these are all the different items that are used to measure this interpersonal fairness perceptions, right? And the participants, they had to answer in yes and no, and we see that the R shows that the items that are reverse coded. Okay, so what are the different determinants of ethical behavior, how it is shaped? One is the individual factors, we are going to discuss here. The other one, the organizational factors. Then we'll be discussing the boss influence, ethics, policies and codes. We'll be discussing the organization's culture, and we'll be discussing the co-worker influence. If we talk about the individual factors, I just told you in one of my previous slides that it is the individuals, their ethical decisions or their ethical behavior, for those decisions or for that ethical behavior, they refer to their reference. They have certain reference points against which they make their decisions. Different individuals have different reference points. So it is the strength of the individual's own personality and the strength of the individual's own characteristic and his own values that are determinant of the ethical behavior of the individual. So some individuals, they might be playing very unethical, and they might try to justify that unethical decision, and they might not consider that unethical behavior or unethical decision as unethical because they have a justification ready for them. So a person who is very corrupt, he may not justify that corruption. He may justify that corruption, and he may think that he is not corrupt or he is not acting corrupt, right? So these are there are basically the individual differences in when it comes to the ethical behavior, how mature you are ethically, and what your ethical standards and what your ethical values are. Of course, there are a number of factors again that in the individual factor in determinant of these individual ethical standards. Again, there are a number of factors such as the kind of training that you have got from your family, the people with whom you are socialized. They all affect that how your ethical behavior and how your ethical values they are shaped up, right? Then there are a number of organizational factors that influence this ethical behavior at workplace. Those organizational factors such as from the top management, there might be pressure for the individual to perform in certain ways and to follow certain deadlines and etc. So they are the influences of the organization on the individual's ethical behavior and ethical decision making. Then the boss or the supervisor of the individual has a very strong influence over the ethical decision making of the individual. So boss, he can play or he can set certain guidelines which or he can play in certain ways which can be as a part of his intention. He can devise certain policies which are ethical or which are which promote ethical or unethical decision making. So he can devise such policies both intentionally and unintentionally. So if a supervisor, for example, sets a targets for the employee that he has to achieve a very optimistic target for the employees to achieve sales of 500 million in a year, or then that might be too difficult for the employee to fulfill those sales targets ethically, and those the employee also knows that fulfillment of that target is really critical to that employee, because he will be really mainly gauged against fulfillment of that target. So if he does not fulfill that target in a year, he might be suspended from the job, or he might be demoted, right? Or he might be moved to another department which is not promising, right? So in a number of consequences, the individual has pressure on him to meet that sales target which is given by the supervisor, and sometimes the supervisors, they themselves have the pressures because they have to report to the top management that what they have done and what they have not done. So they don't want to listen from their subordinates that something has not been done. So it might lead the subordinates to misreport, right, certain figures, facts and figures, because their subordinates, they want to listen, the manager, they want to listen that, or sometimes the manager himself may misreport or manipulate to show more promising outcomes and the promising results to their top managers, right? So it is the and I think in one of my lectures I gave you the example of Sears as well, that in Sears how when the performance evaluations, they were tied to the sales or the sales commission. It was tied to the number of sales that the employees make, how they started playing unethical, and how they started making unnecessary repairs and selling the unnecessary or unrequired spare parts to the customers, right? So that was because the company tied the commissions of the employees to those sales targets, and the employees wanted to achieve to get more and more commission, and as a result they played unethical, right? So sometimes these deadlines are so strict which are given to you by your manager that it's not possible for you to achieve those deadlines, and then you try to play unethical to achieve your targets and to achieve your goals. Then the ethics policies and codes, they are important in determining the ethical behavior of the employee, because the organizations, they need to have a very set and very clear code of conduct which should be very well communicated, which should be very precise, and it should be very clear and well communicated, and there should be a consensus between all the organizational members on this code of conduct, between the senior managers especially, so that the organization and the employees, they receive a strong signal through this code of conduct, that what are the desired ways of behaving in the organization and what are the undesired ways of behaving in the organization, and what the organization considers ethical and what it does not consider ethical. These ethics policies and codes of conduct, they have reported, it has been in a research, it has been found that the organizations that engage in these this kind of ethics policies, and the organizations who have the code of conduct stating the different ethics issues and different ethics policies, those organizations, they tend to show lesser unethical behavior compared to the organizations who don't have any ethics policy and the code of conduct. In those organizations, the incidents of unethical behavior and unethical decision making and has been reported higher. So there is a link between the ethics policies and code of conduct. And then the organization's culture, it has again it has a greater influence on the ethical behavior at the workplace, and we discuss in our future slides that how this organizational culture, it is related to the ethical behavior and how we need to shape the organizational culture. Then the co-worker influence, of course, that is a big determinant of the ethical behavior, because the team members and the group in which you are working, they have a very strong influence over over your behavior, because your team is you are, as a part of the team, you have the group goals, you have the shared norms, you have the shared values on what are what is good and what is bad, and how we should do achieve our goals, how we should meet our targets, and all, because you have the combined goals, you have the overall goals for the team, right? And you have then similar values to share as a team, right? And then you have you know that if you do not behave in certain ways, then the group or the team, it may sanction that behavior of yours. And if you behave ethically and if you behave in a desired manner as per the norms and the values of the team, then the team will recognize your efforts. So as a part, as a requirement of you to remain acceptable in the team, to remain social in the team and acceptable in the team and liked by the other members, you have certain pressures that is coming from the team that allows you to behave ethically or unethically, whatever the values of the team are. So co-worker has a strong influence again on the individual. There are a number of ethical dilemmas that the organization can face and the employees can face. So when the employees, they have to deal with those ethical dilemmas, they have to consider a number of questions, which are the guidelines or the tips for the individuals when they have to deal with that kind of ethical dilemmas. So the first one is that, is the action legal? The employee or the individual needs to ask himself, is it right? Who will be affected? And if will a large number of people be affected by it, or a smaller number of people will be affected by it, or who will be affected? Then does it fit the company's values? How will it feel afterwards? How will it look in the newspaper? Will it reflect poorly on the company or not? Okay, so we had a discussion on a number of factors that influence the or that shape the individual's ethical behavior. And herein we see that this was a survey which was it is very interesting survey, and it has very interesting findings as well. And under this survey, what the questionnaires, they were filled on a number of questions were asked in this questionnaire, and these questions, they were anchors of 1 to 9 was used, where they were a combination of the organizational factors, a combination of, and the individual factors, the supervisory factors that have been used in this to design this questionnaire. And it has been tried to find out that which factors they influence the ethical behavior of the employees most, right? And or under what situations the individuals enter into ethical compromises most. So data for this questionnaire was collected from all the different levels in the organization, starting from the hourly workers to the administrative and the salaried employees to the non-management employees, to the front level supervisors or the frontline supervisors, to the middle managers and the senior management as well. So from the all levels in the organizational hierarchy, the data was collected on all these different questions, and they had to rank against these different questions from 1 to 9, where 1 was showing the highest and the 9 was showing as the lowest. So they had to identify that what was the highest cause of the ethical compromise and which one determines at what level from the anchor of 1 to 9. So it was found that by all the different levels of the managers and the lower level managers and the higher level managers, they ranked 1, which is the highest reason of ethical compromise, to the meeting schedule pressures, and that which was followed by the meeting overly aggressive financial or business objectives, and then helping the company survive, then advancing the career interests of my boss, feeling peer pressure, resisting competitive threats, saving jobs, advance my own career or financial interests, and others. So here we see that the order in which these different items that has been placed, it is as per the response. So the highest factor that influenced the ethical compromises was attributed to the organizational factors. It was followed by the supervisor. So the boss influence was number 2 in determining the ethical compromises that the individuals make, right? And then that was followed by the peer pressure, right? And then the last factor that was the last factor that determined the ethical compromises made by the individuals was their own personal careers. So for the sake of their personal careers, individuals do not tend to make ethical compromises, but they have to make ethical compromises when they are given when they have to meet some pressure schedule. They have a pressure to meet some schedule, or they have to meet the overly aggressive financial targets of the objectives or of the company, or they have to act in certain ways as be advised by the boss, because it is in the interest of the career advancement of the boss. So to the factors external to the individual, which are attributed to the organization or to the supervisor or the peer, they are the highest factors that are responsible for the ethical compromises made by the individuals at all these different levels. So as I told you earlier, that the ethics code, it is positively related to the ethical behavior of the individuals in the organizations, but having an ethics code, it does not necessitate that the organization or the company will also behave ethically, right? So it may or may not work. For example, we have the case of Enron, and we must all be familiar with the corporate scandal of this Enron, right? I would urge you, those of you who have not been through or who are not familiar with this Enron scandal, I would really encourage you to have a look at this. Organizational culture is another factor which is an important determinant of the employees behaving ethically or unethically at the workplace. We know that the organizational culture is the characteristic values, traditions and behaviors that a company's employees share, right? So they are the shared values and the traditions and the norms and the behaviors, the desirable and the undesirable behaviors that is formed by the organizational culture. And this organizational culture, it is established over a long period of time, right? It's not once it is established, it is difficult for the organizational culture to change, right? It is revealed through the ceremonial events, written rules and spoken commands, office layout, organizational structure, the dress code that has been used in the organization, the cultural symbols and behaviors, and the figurehead. So all these number of these factors, they determine the organizational culture, or they reveal the organizational culture. What kind of structure you are using, right? What is the office layout, right? The commands, the ways of doing things, and all these speak up of the organizational culture. Manager, of course, has a strong role in creating this culture, right? He has to clarify the expectations for values to be followed. He has to use signs and symbols to signal the importance of values. He has to provide physical support for values, and he has to use stories to illustrate those values and organize rites and ceremonies reinforcing the values. So there are a number of ways by which the manager he can communicate the culture of the organization, or he can make the culture of the organization stronger or weaker by adhering to one of to these different tools, by using the signs and symbols to show the importance of values, to illustrate the different stories that this is our culture and this is how we promote it. So if an employee in an organization, if an organization promotes the risk taking, right, and then the managers in that organization, or if the culture of the organization is such that it promotes risk taking, then an employee who comes in the organization, and how the manager can promote that risk taking culture to that employee, and by way of telling the stories or symbols, right, that how this existing employee in the organization, how he made this risky decision, and this decision it did not work, it was failed, right, and but that employee was not punished, right. So this is a story that you're telling to a newcomer to promote to him, or to send to him the signals that this is the kind of the organizational culture that is prevalent here. We do promote risk taking, right, we do encourage risk taking, we do not penalize the employees even if the one or two decisions who were made on risk, or who were that were the innovative and the creative decisions, even if they fell wrong, and even if they did not fall in place, we do not penalize them for that. We encourage risk taking, we encourage bringing up new ideas and using new ideas and thinking out of the box, right. So by way of telling the symbols, by way of displaying symbols, by way of telling the different stories, you can illustrate those values to the different individuals, and you can send strong signals to the individuals on what is expected and what is not expected, and what is assimilated or what can be assimilated in the culture and what cannot be. Why you need to treat your employees fairly? Of course, one, they are not employees, they are people. That has been that was said by the management guru Peter Drucker, that you don't need to treat employees fairly because they are employees, but because they are people, they are human beings. Okay, of course there are a number of advantages of treating employees fairly, and if you don't treat employees fairly, you can have a number of losses, which can be financial losses, which can be economic losses, and which can be the losses in terms of the loss of the satisfaction and the morality, and the loss of the motivation levels, and the loss of the justice perceptions of the individuals, and which can lead to a huge losses for the organization in terms of the lost productivity and lost performance and lost motivation of the individuals, right. So and of course if you do not treat your employees fairly, you can have an increased visits of the court, and you can the employees can take you to the litigation, and you can have to deal with a number of court cases, and that can also be a lot of financial penalty on you. As I explained to you earlier, that the management needs to use the fairness in its selection and staffing procedures, and use those activities that are ethical and morally correct at all the different stages, starting from the staffing and selection, where it can foster the perception of fairness in the process of recruitment and hiring of people by using the formal procedures, by in their way of their interpersonal treatment, by providing explanation to the employees for certain decisions, to the prospective candidates for the certain decisions that have been taken. Then you can provide the training to the employees on how to deal with the ethical dilemmas, how to use ethical frameworks such as the code of conduct to resolve the problems. Refer to that code of conduct that you have, refer to the ethical policy of the company that you have to solve, how you have to do that. You can provide the training to the employees. Then how to use the HR functions such as the star interviews and the disciplinary practices in ethical ways. Then in your performance appraisal, as I explained to you earlier, because that is a little bit subjective, and then you need to have use a very fair procedure while appraising the performance of the employees, right? And the standards need to be highly ethical, and you need to measure the employees against those standards which are very transparent and fair, and then reward them on the basis of those standards. Then in your reward and disciplinary systems, again the organization needs to swiftly and hardly punish the unethical conduct, right? And if somebody is behaving ethically, it is important that you reward that individual. It is equally important, as important as it is to punish an individual who is not behaving ethically or who is entering into misconduct. Then the workplace aggression and violence that needs to be taken care of in order to foster the ethical activities in the organization and the fairness perceptions. Of course, you need to protect the whistleblowers as well, because whistleblowers are the people who are giving the warnings of serious wrongdoings in the organization. So whistleblowers, they go to the senior management, or they even go to the external regulatory bodies. They can even go to them to if something is really happening wrong in the organization, such as some employees committing a fraud, or something else is wrong, something other wrong is happening in the organization. Then these are the people who basically blow the whistle, right? And they go to the higher management, they go to the other higher bodies, and they tell them that this is happening. So these whistleblowers, they need to be protected, because sometimes these people they are not protected by the organization's own policies, right? And as a result of their whistleblowing efforts, they might be those might be tied to their negative appraisals, and they might be tied to their negative the negative consequences for them in terms of their promotions, etc. So it is for developing a fair procedure and for increasing the fairness perceptions, it is important to encourage and to build this two-way communication by way of engagement, in which involving the individuals in the decisions that affect them by asking for their input and allowing them to refute the merits of others' ideas and assumptions, right? So you tend to engage your employees, take their input in order to enhance this perception of fair treatment. Then you give them a chance of explanation, and you explain the decisions that you have made in the organization. So explanation should be at both sides, ensuring that everyone involved and affected understands why final decisions are made and the thinking that underlies the decisions, why you made those decisions. So if you explain the process, and then as I told you earlier, the outcomes acceptability also becomes easier, and fairness perceptions increase. Then the expectation clarity should be there, making sure everyone knows up front by what standards they will be judged and the penalties for failure. Then the speak up programs, the communication program that allows employees to register their questions, concerns, feelings and complaints about work related issues. So this kind of speak up programs, in which you are basically it is that you're giving the employees the chance to show their feelings and show their concerns, etc. And so that you know about what are the concerns of the employees and how they have to be solved. And when you give a chance to the employees to communicate and to speak up, it enhances their fairness perceptions. Then the number of opinion surveys is also used, such as the employee satisfaction surveys, or wherein you want to you ask the employees questions on a number of areas, a number of policies, etc. And where you ask them about their satisfaction or dissatisfaction with a number of tasks on the work, or regarding the work life, etc. Right? And then you can also have the top-down programs in the organization, where the top managers, they are meeting with the bottom managers and having their roundtable discussions with them, and in order to discuss the various issues in the organization. So of course, employee discipline and privacy, they are important concerns, and the three things when an employee is entering into a misconduct and you need to discipline that employee, then it is important that there are three step process that you need to follow. One, you should clear the employees about what are the rules and regulations, what is the code of conduct, how he has to behave and how he has not to behave, right? You need to be very clear on the policy or on the code of conduct. Then second, if the employee is entering into a misconduct, then there should be a system of progressive penalties. They should be starting from the minor penalties, and they should go to the major penalties, right? And slowly you should increase the severity of those penalties, right? And the more occurrences of that penalty, the more severe the occurrence of that incident, the more severe should the penalty be. And it also depends upon the magnitude of the misconduct. If the misconduct is small, then the penalty would be small. If the misconduct is very grave, then the penalty would be large as well. And then the appeal process that should be there, the right to appeal to the employee who is grieved, but to the both parties actually who are involved, that should be there after that decision has been made. Then when you have to discipline the employee, you need to address a number of questions, such as that: does the fact support the charge of employee wrongdoing? Were the employee's due process rights protected? Was the employee warned of disciplinary consequences? Was the rule violated, and was it reasonably related to the efficient and safe operation of the work environment? Was the matter fairly and adequately investigated before administering discipline? Did the investigation produce substantial evidence of misconduct? Have rules, orders, or penalties been applied even-handedly? Is the penalty reasonably related to the misconduct and to the employee's past work history? Did the employee have the right to counsel? Did angry, hearsay, or personal impression affect the decision? So as I told you earlier, that when you have to discipline the employee, you need to a system of progressive penalties need to be used, where you should first issue an oral reminder to the employee. Then you should, if another incident again arises after issuing of that oral reminder, then you again, within 6 months, issue a formal written reminder, a copy of which is placed in the employee's personal file, right? And again, if the incident occurs, then you give a paid 1-day decision-making leave to the employee. And if no further incidents occur in the next year, then you should purge the 1-day paid suspension from the person's file. But if the behavior is repeated, then the next step is dismissal. So this is how you are progressively increasing the penalties if the occurrence is taking place again and again, right? Or then the dismissals, they are the involuntary termination of an employee's employment with the firm, right? So this is not a termination at will, it is an involuntary termination that has been taking place on the part of the employer. Because termination at will is when, without a contract, the employee can resign for any reason at will, and the employer can similarly dismiss the employee for any reason or no reason at will, right? So if the dismissal is not termination at will, of course, then there can be a number of grounds against which the employee can be dismissed, right? So within the contract, an employee, if he is not following the terms and conditions of the contract, then you can dismiss that employee owing to a number of reasons, such as that unsatisfactory performance has been shown, he's not able to meet up his assignments, or he's not able to giving his duties he's failed in giving his duties as required, and a number of times that has been happening, right? And then the misconduct in the workplace, the deliberate and willful violation of the employer's rules, such as stealing, rowdy behavior, and insubordination, that is all comes under the misconduct in the workplace. And then there is lack of qualifications for the job, that employee's inability to do the assigned work, although he or she is diligent, but he cannot do that particular work. Then there can also be that when the employee was hired, he was qualified for the job, but now the requirements of the job has changed, and as a result the employee has become unable to do that particular assignment, right? And as a result of that, the employee does not qualify to do that job anyway. So insubordination, which is a part of a misconduct, or which is also a form of a misconduct, and if a employee commits insubordination, he can be dismissed. That is enough ground for the employee to be dismissed on if he is entering into insubordination. So let me give you a few examples of insubordination, such as direct disregard of the boss authority, flat out disobedience of or refusal to obey the boss orders, particularly in front of others, deliberate defiance of clearly stated company policies, rules, regulations, and procedures, public criticism of the boss, contradicting or arguing with him is also negative and inappropriate, right? Then blatant disregard of reasonable instructions, and so on. So these are a number of reasons on which the employee can be discharged, or it can be dismissed because of the on account of the insubordination. All these acts, they come under insubordination. Then the managing dismissals, which is the how you can manage them. You foster a perception of fairness in the dismissal situation by instituting a formal multi-step procedure including warning. As I told you, having a supervising manager give full explanation of why and how termination decisions were made. The manager, he needs to collect all the evidence and the cross evidence, and then he need to really have some sound ground of the misconduct that it occurred, and that was misconduct, right, and how he arrived at his particular decision. Then establish a neutral appeal process, and that also can foster the fairness. So they can be two bases for avoiding the wrongful discharge suits. The discharge does not comply with the law, and the discharge does not comply with the contractual arrangement stated or implied by the firm via its employment application form, employee manuals, or other promises. So then, when it is it is not a discharge as per the contract or the elements or the contents of the contract, right, or it does not comply with the law, then it is a wrongful discharge. So then how companies can avoid this wrongful discharge suits? They can set up employment policies and dispute resolution procedures that make employees feel treated fairly, and they do the preparatory work that helps to avoid such suits. When you have dismissed an employee, you conduct an termination interview, and this termination interview, that can be very tricky and sensitive thing, because you have to tell the employee about your decision, and the employee can become very violent and angry, and he can behave in very violent ways, right? So you first make sure that the employee keeps the appointment time. You never inform an employee over the phone about your decision. You allow 10 minutes as sufficient time for the interview. Yeah? Use a neutral site, not your office. Have employee agreements, the human resources, so all your backup, your support, your argumentation, your decision, every file should be with you. You should be available at the time after the interview in case that there are certain questions or there's certain problems arise. You don't leave soon after the interview. Then have phone numbers ready for medical or security emergencies, because it is a sensitive decision that you're going to communicate the employee, and he can behave in different ways. He can either harm himself, or he can even harm others, etc. You should be to the point. Don't beat about the bush when you have started talking with the employee. Just give him a few minutes that he is settled when he comes in, and then immediately tell him about your decision. Just give him an explanation of why you arrived at that decision. You should also give a chance to the employee to listen if he has to say anything in his in response to this, right? Then you also need to communicate to the employee the severance pay package that the employee would be getting. Okay, and after you have communicated the termination decision to that employee, you need to there are certain organizations that also provide this outplacement counseling services, right? Because the employee at that time, he may feel really disoriented, and he may be very unsure of what he has to do next, right? So this outplacement counseling, it is just it does not ensure that the employee would get his next job, but it's just a guideline and a counseling that is provided to the terminated employee on how he can progress and how he can advance in his career, right? And it is as I explained to you earlier as well, that these exit interviews are really important. That must be conducted in the organization, because they tell the organization a very good picture of how the exiting employees, they perceive their organization to be, what are the loopholes in the organization, and what are the different chances of improvement. So these exit interviews are even better indicator, and they're even better authentic and reliable and valid information than we get in the employee satisfaction surveys, etc. There are a number of questions that can be asked in those exit interviews, such as what your expectations at the job met, what was the workplace environment like, what was your supervisor's management style like, were there any special problem areas, and so on. Then the layoffs, as I told you, they are not terminations, right? Layoffs, they are temporary layoffs. They occur when, of course, there is no work available for the employees because of the lack of the demand of the company products, right? And the management expects the no work situation to be temporary and probably short term, and the management also intends to again call back the employees when more work is available. So normally when for these day of decisions, the seniority is kept in mind, right? It is usually the ultimate determinant of who will work, right? But if the seniority can also give way to merit or ability, but usually only when there are no senior employees who are qualified for a particular job. There are some alternatives to layoffs that are also available, especially in the case when the employee who was initially hired and was fit for a job, but then the job requirements changed, and as a result the employee is no more qualified to do that particular job. In that kind of situation, the organization either can reduce the salary of the employee so that he is not that costly for the organization, and or the organization may think of rotating that employee from that job to some other job, right? And it can also concentrate employees' vacations during slow periods. It can take voluntary time off to reduce the employer's payroll, and offering buyout packages to find enough volunteers to avoid dismissing people. So here is the model that I was telling you, that I would be telling you in the end, that how the different justice perceptions they are affecting the employee commitment, turnover intentions, and their final turnover. Where the procedural justice is related to employee commitment and interpersonal justice is related to satisfaction with supervision, and then they lead to ultimately negatively relate to employee turnover, right? And the other model B, which also shows the effects of procedural and interpersonal justice on the guest service satisfaction in the hotel industry. This survey was conducted, and these are the findings from that survey, that how the interpersonal justice is related to satisfaction with supervision, and procedural justice is related to employee commitment, which then mediate in the relationship between these forms of justice and the guest service satisfaction. So with this we come to an end of today's discussion. I thank you very much. Till the next lecture, see you again. Allah Hafiz.